Well, it's hard to believe that Easter is just a little over 40 days away, but that's what the Lent season is about for the 40 days leading up to Easter, and it begins this coming Wednesday. So just want to encourage you to be in prayer about what it is that you might want to give up for Lent, and that kind of touched on it, but if this is something new to you and you want to learn a little bit more, by all means, reach out to me. But I think it's such an important thing to try and spend this time leading up to Easter to prepare our hearts for what God has for us in this it's the most important day on the calendar, right? And so it's good to prepare your hearts for that, and I encourage you to do so. So anyway, we'll leave it at that for now, and like I said, I also in the last River Cross News, I sent out a link to a devotion, but if you have another devotional for the Lent season, by all means, whatever it is that you feel like God's leading you to, I definitely want to encourage that. All right. Well, today is the final message in our sermon series on the book of Genesis, and some of you are maybe cheering and rejoicing, and some of you may be sad. I don't know, but it has been an incredible book. But next week we start another incredible book. Of course, I could say that about any books in the Bible, right? They're all incredible. But the book of Hebrews is where we're going to go next. Now, it's crazy as we look back over Genesis to look at, I'm going to give you kind of a quick little summary. But we started with the creation of the world. So in the beginning, and that's where everything starts. Adam and Eve were there at the beginning, and then today we're going to actually end with the death of Joseph in Egypt. And so a lot has happened between those two big events. So just for a little fun, since our country celebrates 250 years this year, which is kind of cool, seems like a really long time, but I thought, hey, just for a little fun, I'm going to ask you to guess how many years of history were covered in Genesis from that very beginning, in the beginning, until, well, we haven't quite finished, but we will today. So raise your hand if you think the book of Genesis covered 500 years or less. Good. I may not get any response. It's going to be interesting. Raise your hand if you think the book of Genesis covered between 500 and 1,000 years. So I got 2, okay, 3, 4, all right, 5, all right. Raise your hand if you think the book of Genesis covered between 1,000 years and 1,500 years. Got a couple, a few, okay, scattered about. I got to keep going until we get everybody to raise your hand. So I'm going to keep going as long as you haven't raised your hand. Raise your hand if you think the book of Genesis covered between 1,500 and 2,000 years. Oh, a lot more. Maybe a few haven't though. So raise your hand if you think it covers 2,500 years to 3,000 years. Oh, scattering. I think that kind of covers everybody then. Well, guess what? The last group is right. It covers about 2,300 years of our history. Isn't that crazy? I mean, we think we're going to be 250. That's a lot. 2,300. All in one book. So we covered an awful lot during that time. And some of you may be going, well, how in the world do we know that? Well, the great thing about the Bible is it gives us genealogy, right? It tells us generation to generation to generation. And it does that in Genesis. Also does it in Matthew, by the way. But if you look, and also what does it tell us in there? It tells us how long some people lived during those times. And so if you take that and you do a little math, I know some of you, that's not a good thing for you to do a little math, but trust me, there are people who like math. Anyway, if you do a little math, then it comes up with about 2,300 years of time. Now, just for the sake of comparison, I don't know if you know this, but the entire New Testament covers less than 100 years. So people look at the Old Testament and go, well, it's a bigger book than the New Testament. But it's not like hugely different. But the amount of years that are covered, the spread of time, is pretty amazing how much is covered in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. But that's the way that all plays out. Now, over that 2,300 years, we covered Of course, the lives of Adam and Eve, some of the major people in this Genesis that we've covered: Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Judah and those are the ones that we're kind of ending with. We read at the beginning that God started in paradise, a place called Garden of Eden. By the way, people always say, what is heaven going to be like? Just go and study what it talks about in the Garden of Eden. You'll have a pretty good idea. That was when the paradise was in this. But unfortunately, shortly thereafter, of course, sin came into the world and paradise was over. It fractured everything. So sadly, things continued to go downhill from that point. In fact, it got so bad, the world got so bad and so sinful, so wicked, that God sent a devastating flood, and we covered that. And he started over with Noah and his family and covered that. Now that set the stage for God to choose Abraham and promise him that through his family he would become a great nation. And so this time around, what God said is, I'm going to establish a new nation. And that great nation God established was to be his representative to the world. It was going to be the place or the people group that God was going to work through to show the world who he was and to bring God to the world. Now, they did a pretty good job with that some of the times, no, not all the time, but they had that responsibility. And so that took place, and God said, okay, we're going to start with Abraham. And then the book continued to show us from that point on the growth of his family and how it had grown. And now we are in Egypt, and the family was about 220, 250, we said, when they were actually at this point in Egypt. Now, it would take another 400 plus years in Egypt, being enslaved in Egypt, to grow to a population of about 2 million. But that's what God's plan was. Now, this is so crazy to me, that God orchestrated all of that for his chosen people to grow from 200 to 2 million while being enslaved in Egypt. It's like, well, if God's with them, why are they being enslaved? I mean, it was not easy. They were not treated well during that period of time. Now, they haven't been enslaved yet. That happens in the book of Exodus, but that's another time. And actually, we already did Exodus. If you were here, you may remember. But anyway, the reason God did that, though, is because their enslavement kept them from intermingling with other people groups. In other words, God wanted to create a homogeneous group of people, a protected group of people that had not been defiled, if you will, or infiltrated, particularly by the Canaanites. As you remember, they came from the ungodly line. So God was working to put them in this place so that he could protect them from being spread out, and that he would lose them as their people group. All right. Another crazy thing, though, that we learned about this chosen family, I mean, it didn't take long, right? We get into this, but we learned very quickly that they were not perfect people, right? The Abraham himself, and I mean, all the way through, I mean, all the craziness, the drama, the patent place, if you will, of things happening, it was amazing and they were just far from being perfect people. Now, we look back as our heroes, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we think with very lofty opinions and thoughts of them. And yes, we should. God used them, and God did amazing things in them. But man, they had lots and lots of imperfection. And guess what? Much like Abraham's family was a mess, the church today is made up of only imperfect, messy people too. Sometimes it's interesting. People look and think that the church should be a bunch of perfect people. Like, well, you go to church, you should be, perfect and stuff. Well, no. So come join us. We're just like you. We're just as messy, just as messed up, and got all kinds of things going on. So that's what's taking place. That's where we are today. So that's just a quick review of the first at least 48 chapters. We're going to cover the last 2 today. So if you have a Bible or the church notes, go ahead and turn to Genesis. We're going to pick up in chapter 49, starting in verse 1. And it says this: Then Jacob called for his sons and said, Gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. This chapter 49, is one of the most fascinating and confusing chapters in Genesis. You see, Jacob knows that he's about to die. He's at the very end of his life. He's been thinking he's going to be dying for the last 30 years, but he's really there now. And so he gives his last words to his son, the tribes that would descend from him. And he says, I want to tell you about the days to come. In other words, he's prophesying about the future. That's what he's doing. So basically, Jacob carries forward the theme of the blessing that had been the focal point ever since really the first chapter of the Bible. If you go back to the very first chapter of the Bible, it talks about God blessing the people. And because of the tremendous importance of the family, of this family in God's plan, God gave Jacob this prophetic glimpse of the future. And he's like, I'm going to show you what's going to happen. I want you to pass that along to your sons. Now, I'm not going to go through the prophecies for each of the sons because the main point was Jacob to really announce who is to carry the birthright. That's really where all this kind of is going to focus on. But there's still an awful lot more to it. And in fact, one of them I'll give you right at the very beginning. But if you want to go and read about them, some of them are interesting. Some of them are kind of like, okay, what's the big deal there? But it's still there for you to go to. But let's move on to verse 3. And it says this, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, turbulent as the waters. You will no longer excel. For you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. Jacob starts with his oldest son, Reuben, who is, Reuben's sort of a kind of a pathetic guy, to be honest with you. Of course, as in the case of any firstborn son, at the time that he was born, he was Jacob's pride and joy. That's why Jacob said in verse 3 that Reuben was the first sign of my strength, right? But sadly, Reuben didn't live up to his early promise. He turned out to be a very weak and unstable guy, and worst of all, he committed adultery and incest with his stepmother, right? I don't know if you remember this, but I'll go back to it just because I think it's interesting. Back in chapter 35, it said this, verse 22, and it came about while Jacob was living in the land that Reuben went and slept with his concubine Bilhah, and Jacob heard about it. Like I said, lots of drama, lots of crazy things happening, messy people and stuff. Now, if you didn't know, concubine is just, it's a term for a woman who is sort of secondary wife status. She was not really viewed as the wife, but just was sort of there to be a companion for, I don't know. It wouldn't go well in my family, but that apparently back then was the thing. Trust me, I can't handle one. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, I mean, it's on him for defining. And one of those is on all, you'll hear of a crazy, I don't know if you've seen that, but I mean, listen, that's supports polygamy. Because it's like what God continues to get. Verse 8, he's still Judah. All your relatives is a young lion that is like a lioness. He dares pull her staff from his descendants. And Jesus, the answer to all, maybe not when I'm asking years, but he ties his eyes. Jacob has out the sons until he gets to Judah. Chosen, he's the one leader. He would be. He's like he is would be productive. Prod in them would be okay. Back then, like deep. And when he assured him the rulership became Judah's line of Israel. What does it say? Jesus came. He's from Judah. I don't know if you knew that. See, initially in a map at that time, or different, a lot of history, but that's what this is setting. Let's keep moving. One other help to giving this the heaven above on you. So the head of Jacob. Joseph was such a of Judah. Birthright. A difference in the words Jacob had mainly zero in verse 28. And to them when tribes of Israel, no doubt was God in the middle of this. And in chapter 50, I've got to hurry up and verse 1 off in there. Paste these in, okay? When Job died saying, this is brothers and their sins to do, he wept. He's the one with power, right? He's going to get it. Well, first of all, they didn't even go. Secondly, that Jacob said, and this up, and so that I carry a lot of guilt, can really do up to the. So the mature, as you grow close, puts in a power There is with charity. I think hard to imagine. And go a little easier and tell him the betrayal they had. I mean, God it wasn't those all of us have problems, some tremendous healing. You see, can get to a point he was healed, and he gives us from the inside out and say, I'm not, but we're not. This question, but that transform you. So deserve, treated them how they got it right. Who knows? Real quick. But do you receive that? And I don't care how mature you mode, but as we're in yourself, be healed. Okay, in it for good. But here's what God can see it. Plan was planned for Joseph's life. Slavery. Your faith, you should be. He can't be not abandon that. You need evil. I'm gonna put up here. God, more.